Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Spanner Man again here with another video. Today I'm going to talk about setting up a grinder for sharpening chains for the beginner. I'll try not to use too many technical terms, and we'll try and go over the most important things and the questions that most likely a beginner would ask. So first of all, we would assume that you've got yourself a chainsaw. Most people don't go out and buy the biggest chainsaw available because who would do that? You would most likely have a small chainsaw, probably 3/8 low profile or standard 3/8. 3/8 low profile and standard 3/8 are the two most popular chains used worldwide and are probably used in 95% of applications. It's only those specialty applications that we do in chainsaw cutting, whether it's milling, and that's slabbing timber, or whether we're falling trees or doing something else. So let's just say you got yourself a chainsaw and you're going to be cutting some firewood, and you might be using it for pruning some trees on your property or something like that there. So we'll assume that you've got either 3/8 low profile or standard 3/8 chain. Now, in most cases, you'll be using a semi-chisel chain, which is what this is here. Semi-chisel chain means that it's got a rounded tooth on it. So the corner of the tooth is rounded, and it has a working corner that's also rounded. So if we look at the chain there, it's a little bit hard to see, but look, I've got a semi-chisel tooth that are a replica, and you can see how it's rounded on the edge, and especially if we come to the front of the tooth, you can see this working edge. This is referred to the working edge here, and this is much more forgiving than a full chisel. A full chisel chain looks like this. It comes to a much sharper point. So in most cases, you'll be using this, a semi-chisel tooth. So a semi-chisel tooth, like a full chisel tooth, needs to have an angle on it. And that angle is generally about 30 degrees. And that's this angle here. So that angle is set on a scale, which is this scale that's here. And you've got left and right settings. So if 0 is in the middle like that, you've got your 35 degrees to your left and 35 degrees to your right. So in most cases, you're going to use 30 degrees to the right or 30 degrees to the left. So that needs to be set up. The next thing that you need to set up is the backstop, the chain backstop. This is the chain backstop here, and this is the adjustment for the chain backstop. So when we put a chain in there and we pull it back, you can see that it locks in behind the tooth. This little tang here locks behind the tooth, and we adjust. This adjustment here will push the tooth towards a grinding wheel. When we do that, we just have it so we set that up without the grinder running, and we adjust this wheel so that the tooth just touches the grinding wheel. The next adjustment, but we won't adjust it, you'll notice that the motor and the grinding wheel are at an angle. It's a 60-degree angle. On a lot of the cheaper grinders, you don't have that adjustment. So that's set at 60 degrees here. That's standard. 99% of your chains will have a 60-degree angle. We won't go into why you would want different angles. That could a different subject. If you look on the YouTube channel, you'll see geometry. There's a good video on that can tell you about some of the other angles. So it's set at 60 degrees. So the only thing that we're going to use is our 30 degrees here, and we're set at 60 degrees here. Also on this particular model, we won't go into it, but the vise has a tilting option on it that is used for full chisel chains. We are not going to use that feature. I'm locking this up at 30 degrees because that's all you're going to be set at. Now the other thing is that your grinding wheels come in different thicknesses. You've got 2 thicknesses for different chains, which is 3.2 millimeters for your smaller chains and your 4.7 millimeters for your 3/8 standard and 404 chains. So these wheels are quite easy to change, so it depends on what chain that you've got. Currently this has got a 4.7 millimeter thickness wheel in it. It's a pink oxide wheel. They're the cheapest ones that are out there. They're good enough, but the brown oxide ones are much better. They're bonded, resin bonded, whereas these are glass bonded. So we'll set this up and we'll do a little bit of a grind, and hopefully you'll have a much better understanding. So what we need to do is bring this head down and see how close it is towards the tooth. Now, if this is set to the right-hand side, this is set to the right-hand side, but that actually corresponds to the left-hand tooth, so it's the other way around. So when we set this to the right-hand side, it means that we're going to grind the left-hand tooth, which is the tooth closest to the grinder or further away from the operator. Whereas when we set on the other side, the left-hand side of this scale, we're going to grind the right-hand tooth. Now, when we bring this down, we'll just make sure that we can sort of zoom in there a little bit and see whether you can see that. I need to back that off a little bit. You can see as I'm rocking that wheel that that tooth is moving backwards and forwards. That's a good starting position. We'll lock that into position. Bring that back down. No, it needs a bit more. Go forwards a little bit, lock it back into position. You can hear that rubbing. So in that position, that is a good starting position. So that's all we need to do. The only other adjustment is that when you bring this grinding wheel down, there's an adjustment on the side, a little knob. We'll just briefly have a look at that. Is this adjustment here. So this is your lock nut and this is your adjustment. And you want to make sure that if you have a look at a tooth, it's chrome plated. And you want to make sure that you're not grinding below the chrome plate. So when we look at the tooth, chrome plating goes down to here. This is referred to as the gullet. So don't grind down below this point here. And that's what that adjustment's for, that you can adjust it. So if we turn this on, biggest mistake people make when they first start grinding is bringing the grinding wheel down too hard and holding it. The correct way to grind, so to avoid overheating the tooth, is off, on, off, on. So now you'll see I can touch that tooth. That's quite, it's only lukewarm. So then it's a matter of going to the next tooth. Actually feels quite sharp. I only taken off about 0.2 of a millimetre here. That one was marked because it's a little bit short. Got damaged. You don't worry about those damaged ones. You'll hear some people on the YouTube channels that'll turn around and tell you, oh, look for your worst tooth, your damaged tooth, and grind them all the same length. I agree in principle that you try and keep them the same length, but if you've got the odd one or two, don't worry about it. Try and keep them the same length where possible, but as I said, if you get the odd one, don't worry about it. Okay, so you've let's just say you grind all that side, the left side. Now you need to take the chain off. You need to visually inspect it and make sure it's okay. If you look and you think that it needs a little bit more of a grind on a few teeth, just do it again, a second pass. Maybe just adjust the backstop a fraction, and then just proceed to do it again at a light pass. You're better off doing it twice than doing one big heavy cut. Just take your time. You'll get used to it. In time, it'll be so easy because it's not really difficult to do. You just got to take your time. Don't rush it. And as I said, don't bring this grinding wheel down and hold it. Tap off and on, because when you bring it down and you tap off and on, especially when you lift back up, you're allowing the tooth to cool down, and that off and on tap in motion, that's what it does. Allows the tooth to cool down, because if you hold it on the tooth, it's just going to heat up. Okay, so if you're happy with the left-hand side and it looks okay, then it's just a matter of loosening the nut underneath, rotate to the 30 degrees on the left, and that will mean that we're going to do the right side tooth. So it would be exactly the same procedure as what we've done on the left hand, is that you would make this adjustment, bring the grinding wheel down, make sure that it doesn't, just touches, barely touches, and then proceed to grind. Only one other thing that I would say on this particular type of grinder, you'll see a lock nut here, and this little plate moves from side to side. The whole idea of that is, in the position that it's in at the moment, if I bring this grinding wheel down, you'll notice the grinding wheel almost touches that plate. So you need to undo this plate and bring it closer towards the operator. So move that a plate away from the grinding wheel. Now you can see there's a gap there. So that's much further away, and it's much safer to do it. So it's just a matter now of grinding the right side. Exactly the same deal as what you've done on the left side. Take it off, inspect it. If you believe it needs a second pass, do it. There may be just the odd tooth that needs to be done, and that's it. So that's pretty basic and straightforward if you stick to those rules. Just the most important rule is bringing this down and just doing it nice and gentle. Okay, so when that's all done and you're happy with it and you've inspected it and you go, yep, that's razor sharp, because you can really feel it too with your fingers. Yeah, you can really feel how good it is. You need to actually check the depth gauges. Now that's pretty straightforward as well. That's not that difficult, but you need to know how to do that. So we will just sort of have a little bit of a brief talk about that. One of the depth gauges that are out there that are pretty common would be this type of depth gauge here, made by Stihl. It's called a constant depth gauge because if you look at the actual gauge, it's got 0.65 of a millimetre. What that actually means, you can see the step down here, how you've got the step, is that 0.65 of a millimetre refers that the actual raker gauge, or the depth gauge there with my fingernail, is 0.65 of a millimetre lower than the actual tooth. So that means it will take out, just under a millimetre. It'll bite into the tooth. So this depth gauge limits the amount that the tooth can bite into, and it needs to be checked just to make sure that it's at the right distance. You can use this type of gauge. This type of gauge is not as popular today as what it used to be. The progressive depth gauge, which is this one, also made by Stihl, it's got a hard and soft setting. It doesn't sit over 3 or 4 tooth. It sits on a individual tooth, and it's just a matter of placing it on there and running the file over and doing the next one and running the file over. That's pretty easy to use, and you can run the file over this gauge because this has a rock-wool hardness of 62, whereas a file has a rock-wool hardness of 60. So that's pretty straightforward. Avoid buying the cheaper raker gauges because the cheaper raker gauges aren't hardened, and if you run the file over the top, you'll end up filing a gauge away. So I hope that helps. There's not much else I could probably say about basic grinding or filing. This tutorial was mainly for the beginner out there that's using a grinder, and if you want to check your depth gauges. There's more on the YouTube channel. Look, give us some comments, some feedback, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.